In the heart of the Akan lands, where the dense forest spread endlessly and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth, there lived a hunter named Kweku. His life was one of solitude and quiet determination, for hunters often spend their days far from the laughter of the village, their only companions the calls of birds and the rustle of animals in the brush. Kweku was neither the strongest nor the wealthiest among the villagers, but he was known for his sharp eyes and quick steps, traits that had served him well in the pursuit of game. The forest was his world, and each path was as familiar to him as the lines on his palm. Still, even to a seasoned hunter, the forest held mysteries too deep to be fully understood. The elders often warned that the trees were not silent, and that the spirits of the ancestors and forgotten souls lingered in the shadows, watching the living as they went about their lives. That morning had begun like any other, with the rising sun staining the sky a pale gold. Kweku had set out before dawn, carrying his bow and quiver, his mind on the thought of returning with a fat antelope for the evening meal. But as the day wore on, he found no trace of game. The forest seemed unusually still, as if the creatures had hidden themselves from sight. By midday, hunger gnawed at his belly and weariness slowed his pace. He paused near a cluster of giant trees, their roots coiling like serpents through the soil, and sat upon a rock to rest. It was there, while brushing leaves from the ground with the tip of his spear, that his eyes caught something strange, a pale shape among the shadows of the undergrowth. At first, he thought it was the sun striking a stone, but as he leaned closer, he realized it was a human skull, bleached white with age, its hollow eyes staring silently upward as if waiting for someone to notice. Kweku crouched low, his breath caught in his throat as he studied the skull. It rested partly hidden beneath fallen leaves, its bone surface cracked and weathered by time. The empty sockets seemed almost alive, watching him with a gaze that unsettled his spirit. He had stumbled across bones before, every hunter did, for the forest was as much a place of death as of life. But this skull was different. It was too clean, too deliberate in its placement, as though it had not been scattered by chance but left there with purpose. Around it, no other bones could be seen. No ribs, no arms, no legs, only the skull, sitting alone in the earth like a grim trophy. A chill ran through Kweku's body. His grandmother's words whispered in his mind, "Not every silence in the forest is empty. Some silences are watching." He straightened slowly, torn between fear and fascination. The sun had shifted, spilling slanted beams of light through the canopy above, and the skull gleamed unnaturally bright. Kweku found himself circling it, spear held ready, though what weapon could pierce a spirit he did not know. His instincts urged him to leave at once, to vanish into the safety of familiar paths, to pretend he had never seen it. Yet his curiosity rooted him in place. He leaned closer still, peering into its hollow green. For the first time in hours, the forest stirred, not with the cry of a bird or the scurry of prey, but with something stranger. The wind hushed, and in the silence Kweku thought he heard a sigh. He froze, eyes wide, heart pounding. The skull had moved, if only in sound, and the stillness around him deepened until even his own breath felt out of place. Kweku's pulse thundered in his ears as he crouched before the strange relic. His eyes darted across the clearing, searching for movement, for any trick of light that might explain what he thought he had heard. But the forest was silent. The wind no longer teased the branches, the birds had hushed, and even the insects seemed to pause their song. He leaned closer, steadying himself on the shaft of his spear. The skull lay motionless, half sunk in the earth, its green wide and empty. For a moment, Kweku wondered if his mind had betrayed him. Fatigue and hunger could stir strange imaginings, and perhaps the stillness of the forest was only pressing too heavily on his thoughts. Yet just as he resolved to step back, the sound came again. This time it was unmistakable, a low, rasping murmur, as though words were crawling up from the depth of the bone itself. Kweku stumbled backward, his spear raised in trembling hands. Who speaks?" he demanded, his voice quivering as much from awe as from fear. To his astonishment, the skull's jaw shifted slightly, not with flesh and sinew but with an eerie, unseen force. From its hollow mouth spewed a voice dry as the earth in drought, yet steady, "It is I." The hunter's knees weakened, and he stared at the thing with disbelief. Never had he heard of a skull speaking, not even in the tales recited by the elders on moonlit nights had such a marvel been told. How did you come to lie here, speaking with no tongue?" Kweku whispered, his curiosity breaking through his terror. The skull's response was slow, measured, and heavy with meaning. "Talking brought me here." The words clung to the air like smoke, refusing to vanish, echoing in Kweku's chest long after the sound had ceased. Kweku stood frozen, the weight of the words pressing down on him. "Talking brought me here." The phrase circled in his mind like a restless bird, but its meaning slipped through his grasp. How could talking condemn a man to such a fate? What words had been spoken so carelessly that they led to death and left only bone behind? His fear urged him to run, to leave the skull where it lay and never speak of it again. Yet his curiosity bound him more tightly than fear. He lowered his spear and leaned forward, his eyes locked on the hollow sockets that seemed to follow his every move. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steadier now, though his heart still raced. "Whose words brought you here? What tale lies behind your resting place?" The skull remained silent for a time, and Kweku thought it would not answer. Then, with a dry rasp, it whispered again, "The tongue is sharp. Sharper than any blade. Words can build, and words can destroy. Talking without wisdom brought me here." The hunter shivered, for the warning sounded less like a tale and more like a judgment. He felt the forest closing in, the shadows deepening around him as though spirits leaned closer to listen. "But surely," Kweku pressed, "if your words led you here, they might save others from the same fate. Should I not carry this message back to the village, to the chief and to the elders, so that they may learn?" The skull's jaw clicked once, and then it fell silent. No further words came. The clearing grew heavy again, the silence thick and suffocating. Kweku's mind wavered between caution and pride. To keep such a wonder to himself seemed impossible. A talking skull. Surely, if he told the chief, he would be rewarded, honored as the one who uncovered a mystery no other man had seen. And yet, in the back of his mind, the warning lingered, "Talking brought me here." For a long while, Kweku sat before the skull, the silence of the forest pressing on his chest. His grandmother's teachings came back to him. The tongue is a drum, beat it too much, and it will call trouble to your door. But pride, like a spark on dry grass, had already begun to smolder within him. The villagers often laughed at Kweku for being quiet, for keeping to himself, for bringing home only modest catches from his hunts. If he returned now with a tale of the skull that spoke, if he could show them proof of his discovery, he would silence his doubters forever. The thought of the chief praising him, of the elders nodding in respect, and of children gathering wide-eyed at his feet to hear the tale made his heart swell. He could not keep this secret buried. Kweku rose to his feet, gripping his spear as though it would lend him courage. He gave the skull one last look. It sat unmoving, its grin stretched wide as if mocking his choice. "I will tell them," Kweku declared aloud, his voice trembling. "They must know what I have seen." The skull, as if in response, gave a faint, rattling sigh, or perhaps it was only the wind stirring the leaves again. Without waiting to hear more, Kweku turned and hurried down the forest path toward his village. Each step carried him farther from the strange silence, but the words followed him, whispering in his thoughts, "Talking brought me here." He tried to push them aside, quickening his pace. By the time the huts of his village came into view, his fear had turned into excitement. He would tell his story, and they would finally believe in him. By the time Kweku reached the village square, his chest was heaving, and his face glistened with sweat. The people were gathered, as they often were in the late afternoon, tending to their chores or resting under the shade of the great baobab tree. The pounding of pesos against mortars, the laughter of children, and the smell of roasting yam filled the air. Kweku raised his voice above the noise, eager and breathless. Listen to me, all of you, he cried. I have seen a wonder in the forest, a skull that speaks. At first, no one paid him much mind, for hunters often told wild tales after long days. But as his words grew louder, the villagers paused, turning curious eyes toward him. They gathered around as he recounted his discovery, the pale skull lying in the shadows, the rasping voice, and the chilling words it spoke. He told it with such urgency that even the children leaned forward, their eyes wide. Yet as he finished, silence lingered for only a heartbeat before the square erupted with laughter. Men slapped their thighs, women shook their heads, and children squealed with delight at what they thought was a fanciful story. Kweku has been too long in the forest, one man chuckled. The sun has baked his brain. Another woman added, perhaps the yam spirits whispered to him, eh. Their mocking laughter stung more sharply than a thorn. But Kweku's eyes burned with conviction. It is no lie, he insisted, his voice firm. If you do not believe me, come and see it for yourselves. The skull is there, waiting. It will speak again. I swear it. His boldness drew the attention of the chief, who had been listening from his stool at the edge of the crowd. The murmurs quieted as the chief, a man of great presence and wisdom, rose slowly and studied Kweku with narrowed eyes. A skull that speaks, the chief repeated. Very well, hunter. Let us see if your tongue speaks truth or folly. The laughter in the village square died down as the chief's voice settled over the crowd. His tone was calm, but beneath it was the weight of authority that none dared ignore. Kweku, he said, stepping forward, his staff in hand, you claim to have seen a skull that speaks. Such a thing, if true, would not be a small matter. A voice from the dead carries meaning beyond men's wisdom. But if you have lied, then you have wasted our time and dishonored your people. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the crowd before fixing it once more on Kweku. We will go with you to this skull. If your story is true, the ancestors will bear witness. If it is not, his words trailed off, but the silence that followed spoke clearly. Punishment awaited if Kweku was found a liar. Kweku swallowed hard, his earlier excitement tempered by a chill of doubt. What if the skull remained silent in the presence of others? Still, his pride would not allow him to retreat. Bowing his head, he replied, yes, my chief. Follow me, and you will see. The chief nodded and ordered several of his guards to join them. Soon, a procession formed, the chief at the center, the guards close behind, and villagers trailing eagerly, whispering with anticipation. Children skipped along the edges, thrilled at the adventure, while the elders walked with weary eyes, muttering prayers under their breath. Kweku led the way, his steps quick but heavy, as though the forest path had grown longer than he remembered. Each turn of the trail brought him closer to the clearing, and with it, a gnawing fear. The words of the skull echoed in his mind like a drumbeat, talking brought me here. Yet he pushed forward, hoping, desperately, that the skull would not betray him. The forest seemed different when Kweku returned, no longer a place of mystery belonging only to him. The villagers' footsteps broke the stillness, their voices buzzing like bees as they whispered about what they expected to see. Some joked, others scoffed, but a few cast wary glances among the towering trees, remembering the elders' warnings that the forest was never truly empty. The chief, tall and dignified, walked in silence, his staff tapping against the earth with each measured step. Kweku's heart pounded as he led them along the winding path, until at last, the familiar clearing came into sight. There, Kweku said, his voice sharp with eagerness. He pointed to the patch of leaves where the skull lay gleaming in the dim light. The crowd pushed forward, and the chief motioned for silence. All eyes turned to the bleached bone resting quietly in the grass. Speak, Kweku urged, dropping to his knees. Tell them what you told me. Show them that I do not lie. The villagers leaned closer, straining to hear. A long moment passed. Nothing. The skull stared up at the sky with its hollow eyes, its grin fixed and empty. A ripple of uneasy laughter spread through the crowd. Kweku's palms grew slick with sweat. "Speak, I beg you," he cried again, his voice breaking. But the forest remained still. The skull gave no sound, no whisper, not even a sigh. Murmurs rose among the villagers. "We have been fooled," one man muttered. "A hunter's trick," said another. Children giggled, while the elders shook their heads in disappointment. The chief's face darkened, his patience worn thin. He turned his stern gaze on Kweku, who now trembled before the silent skull. The hunter's mouth went dry as he realized the terrible truth. The very thing that had promised to make him great had now abandoned him. The villagers' murmurs grew louder, swelling like a restless tide. Some laughed openly now, pointing at Kweku as he knelt before the unmoving skull. Others shook their heads in pity, whispering that the hunter had surely lost his mind. The chief raised his staff, and the crowd fell silent. His face was grave, his eyes fixed on Kweku with a mixture of disappointment and anger. "Hunter," the chief said, his deep voice carrying through the clearing, "you have brought us into the heart of the forest with promises of wonders. You have claimed to speak truth, yet before our eyes, there is only silence." He gestured toward the skull, its grin cruel in the fading light. "The ancestors do not mock us with lies. If you have spoken falsely, then you have mocked both your people and your chief." Kweku's mouth went dry. He turned back to the skull, desperation breaking through his pride. "Please," he whispered, pressing his forehead to the earth. "Speak as you did before. Tell them, so that they will know." But the skull remained still, and the silence grew heavier with every breath. The chief's patience snapped. He struck the ground with his staff, the sound sharp as thunder. "Enough. A man's tongue is his honor. If he uses it to deceive, then his life is worth no more than the lie he speaks." He turned to his guards, his expression unyielding. "Seize him." Gasps rippled through the villagers. The guards stepped forward, their spears gleaming in the dim light. Kweku staggered to his feet, his eyes wide with terror. "No. I speak the truth. The skull spoke to me, I swear it." His cries fell on deaf ears. The guards grabbed his arms, their grip iron-strong, and pulled him away from the clearing. The chief watched with stern eyes, and the villagers followed in silence. Only the skull remained behind, its grin wide and unchanging, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. The procession back to the village was heavy with silence. No one laughed now, for the chief's words carried the weight of law, and all knew that the punishment for dishonoring the people was severe. Kweku stumbled as the guards dragged him forward, his eyes darting desperately between the villagers who trailed behind. Some avoided his gaze, unwilling to witness his fear. Others shook their heads, whispering that he had brought this on himself. But a few, the children who had once listened eagerly, the elders who knew the forest held mysteries, looked at him with unease, as though they wondered if perhaps his tale had held some truth after all. Still, no one spoke against the chief's command. When they reached the village square, the chief ascended his stool once more, lifting his staff high. "This man," he declared, his voice ringing clear, "has led us astray with false words. He claimed to have heard the dead speak, yet brought us only silence and shame. Let it be known that a tongue which lies brings death not only to the man, but dishonor to the community. Therefore, the sentence is death." A gasp rose from the crowd, though none dared to challenge him. Kweku fell to his knees, his voice breaking. "Mercy, my chief. I swear by the ancestors, I did not lie." The skull spoke, and it warned me. But his pleas only deepened the chief's frown. "Enough," the chief said coldly. "You have spoken too much already." He gestured to the guards. "Do what must be done." The guards moved swiftly. One raised his spear, the point gleaming in the firelight, while the other held Kweku down. The hunter struggled, but his strength was no match for theirs. A moment later, the spear descended. The villagers turned away as his cry echoed through the square, then fell silent forever. By nightfall, the hunter lay still, and his body was carried beyond the village to the very forest where his tale had begun. Night had fallen by the time the guards carried Kweku's body back into the forest. The moon hung pale above the trees, casting silver light over the winding paths. Shadows stretched long and deep, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and leaves. The villagers followed at a distance, torches flickering in their hands, their faces grim. No one spoke. The silence was heavy, as though even the forest itself knew what had taken place. The guards bore the lifeless hunter upon a wooden litter, their steps steady, their eyes fixed ahead. By the chief's command, his body was not to rest in the village graveyard, his punishment was exile even in death. He would lie in the wilderness, a warning to others. At last, they reached the clearing where the skull still lay. There it was, unchanged, its hollow socket staring upward, its grin as wide and cruel as before. The villagers shifted uneasily, some refusing to step closer. The guards lowered Kweku's body beside the skull, laying him on the earth with little ceremony. One of them muttered, "Here ends the man whose tongue brought him ruin." The chief, standing tall at the edge of the clearing, lifted his staff. "Let this be a lesson," he declared, his voice firm. "The tongue can lead a man to greatness or cast him into shame. May our children remember this night." Then, without another word, he turned and led the villagers back along the path, their torches vanishing one by one into the darkness. Soon, the clearing was silent again. Only the pale skull and the fresh corpse remained, side by side in the shadows. The forest stirred, as if awakened by the presence of death, and the air grew thick with unseen eyes. Above, the moonlight bathed the scene in a ghostly glow, as though waiting for something to happen. And in that silence, the story was not yet done. The forest grew still after the villagers' departure, as though the trees themselves held their breath. The torches had vanished into the distance, and only the pale light of the moon lingered over the clearing. For a time, nothing stirred. Kweku's body lay motionless beside the old skull, his eyes closed forever, his mouth silenced at last. But death has its own patience, and the forest its own secrets. Slowly, as the hours passed, the night deepened, and a strange hush settled over the earth. Then, from the lifeless hunter, a faint sound stirred. His lips, slack in death, parted ever so slightly. His head rolled weakly to the side until his face lay turned toward the waiting skull. From the old skull came a rasping voice, dry and brittle as autumn leaves. "How did you come here?" The words floated into the air like smoke, thick with the weight of inevitability. For a moment, silence hung heavy, and then, impossibly, Kweku's mouth moved. His voice was faint, hollow, as if spoken from somewhere far away, yet the words were clear, "Talking brought me here." His jaw clattered softly, as though death itself lent its own grim rhythm to his speech. The clearing seemed to shiver, the shadows deepening as if unseen spirits leaned closer to listen. The old skull gave a rattling chuckle, though there was no mirth in it. "Yes," it whispered, "as it brought me here too." The two skulls lay side by side, their hollow eyes gazing skyward, their grins eternal. And with that, the forest grew silent once more, not the silence of peace, but of secrets buried, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon them. Long after Kweku's life had ended, the forest held the memory of what had happened. Travelers who passed near the clearing spoke of a heaviness in the air, a stillness unlike any other. Birds would not sing there, and animals avoided the path that led to the place of the two skulls. Some said that on nights when the moon was full, faint voices could be heard drifting through the trees, rising and falling like the rustle of dry leaves. Few dared to linger long enough to listen, but those who did swore they heard the words repeated again and again, "Talking brought me here." The phrase, whispered by unseen mouths, became part of the forest itself, as though the trees carried it on their back and the wind wove it into its song. Back in the village, the tale spread quickly. Though many had mocked Kweku, his death could not be ignored. The elders, gathered beneath the baobab tree, spoke gravely of the event. "The ancestors are wise," one said, "and they use the tongue to test the hearts of men." Another nodded. Kweku's pride blinded him. He sought glory for himself, not wisdom for his people. That is why his words became his undoing. The story traveled from elder to child, from heart to gathering, growing into a warning that echoed louder than Kweku's cries ever heard. Hunters, herders, and even chiefs began to repeat the lesson: the tongue has no bone, yet it breaks the neck. Speak with care, or words will lead you to ruin. Thus, the forest whispers became village wisdom, and the talking skull's riddle found a place in the hearts of the living. In the days and months that followed, the tale of Kweku and the talking skull spread far beyond his village. Storytellers carried it to neighboring towns, weaving it into evening gatherings and fireside lessons. Everywhere it was told, the message grew clearer: the tongue is both a gift and a danger. The elders reminded their people that words can heal or harm, bring honor or shame, life or death. It is not the spear that pierces deepest, they would say, but the careless tongue. Children learned to listen carefully, not only to what was said but to the weight of silence, for silence itself carried wisdom. Men and women alike were warned to guard their speech, to think before speaking, and to respect the power of the tongue. The story became a mirror for all who heard it. Some saw themselves in Kweku's pride, hungry for recognition and too eager to speak without caution. Others saw the chief's justice, swift and stern, reminding them that a community's honor rests on the truth. And all understood the skull's grim wisdom: talk too much, and you invite ruin. In time, the tale was condensed into a simple proverb whispered from elder to child: talking brought me here. These 4 words carried the weight of a man's downfall and the memory of a skull that refused to speak when truth was needed most. It was a lesson that lingered in the air, etched into the minds of the people, and bound forever to the forest where silence was louder than speech. Generations passed, but the tale of the talking skull never faded. The forest clearing where the 2 skulls lay became a place of quiet dread, avoided by hunters and travelers alike. On moonlit nights, when the wind moved gently through the trees, some swore they could still hear faint whispers drifting from that place. Others claimed that if one lingered too long, the skulls might turn their hollow eyes upon the living, ready to pass their riddle once more. Few dared to test the truth, for all knew what had become of Kweku, and none wished to share his fate. The forest had become a keeper of memory, holding the story in its shadows, and the skulls remained as silent guardians of a wisdom too easily forgotten. In the villages, the story settled into the rhythm of life. Grandmothers told it by the fire as children listened wide-eyed, their small tongues stilled by the warning. Chiefs repeated it in council, reminding hot-headed men that prideful words could undo the strongest hunter or the bravest warrior. The proverb endured like stone: talking brought me here. And each time it was spoken, the people remembered that words are not weightless. They can build or destroy, unite or divide, honor or condemn. The skull's riddle was no longer just a tale, it was a truth carved into the heart of the Akan people. Thus, the story of Kweku and the talking skull lived on, not in bone alone, but in the wisdom of generations. The skulls lay silent in their clearing, their grins eternal, but their lesson echoed louder than any voice: guard your tongue, for once spoken, words cannot be gathered back. In the stillness of the forest, where silence is sacred and speech can bring ruin, the warning remains eternal: spoken once, remembered forever.